I was interviewing an economist a couple of weeks ago, and he opined that gasoline cars would be around for a long time because they would be the vehicle of choice in developing countries like, say, Latin America, when they would be dirt cheap, maybe $5,000 around that range. And I thought I'd test that out to see if, in fact, electric cars could be built that inexpensively. So I'm going to talk to Bill Russo, who's the CEO of Automobility, and he comes joining us from China. So welcome to the interview, Bill.
Well, thanks, Marco. Nice to be here.
Let's start off. I understand that the Chinese actually make some very, very inexpensive cars. Like I found one when I was doing my prep that sells for $900, which seems almost unbelievable. But are these small, really tiny micro cars, really cheap cars, are they common in China?
Well, there is a segment, and they're not entirely encouraged, called low-speed EVs, which are essentially, probably scooters plus, scooter with a wrapper, and they're prevalent in lower tier regions of China. Not exactly what you'd call, roadworthy or, the most desirable vehicles to be seen in, but they're functional for a large swath of the population, in particular the emerging regions of China. I would say that I would actually be looking at sort of more of the commercial market, like the commercially viable market, like the ones vehicles such as the Wuling Hongguang Mini EV, which is the top selling EV in China, which has a sticker price in the $5,000 range. There are other products like the Cherry QQ ice cream, which are slightly higher in price, but similar, below $10,000. And this is where I think China's EV development differs from the rest of the world, in that they've targeted affordability. They've targeted, I wouldn't call cheap. The ones that you're referring to, the low speed EVs, are definitely targeting very, very cheap positioning. But the more, I'd say the more mainstream products are actually targeting affordability. Below 300,000 RMB in price, which is where the middle of the market tends to reside, where the high volume segments tend to reside.
Now, the Hongguang Mini gets a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour, can accommodate 4 people at a squeeze, and is actually outselling Tesla by quite a wide margin, I understand.
That's correct. This is the product that comes from a joint venture that exists between Shanghai Auto Industrial Company and General Motors. It's a fairly well-engineered, affordable electric vehicle, and it sells in extremely high volumes in the lower tier regions of the country. You have to understand, people in China, there's a large swath of the population that want affordability and don't really put a premium on performance, right? These are city cars. These are cars that are going to be used in urban, densely populated urban locations. How quickly they accelerate is not as important as how functionally they are, and how affordable they are.
Right. I read somewhere recently that in China, the average speed in the city is like 50 or 60 kilometers. I mean, in that, people are spending a lot of time in traffic, and these small electric cars function very well in that environment.
Absolutely. Now, this isn't the only development in China. I think if you look in general across the board, whether it's these vehicles priced below 100,000 RMB, and by 100,000 RMB, I mean less than $15,000. Again, the Hongguang itself, the price ranges anywhere from 28.8 thousand to 38.8, which is 5 to 6,000, or below 5,000 and slightly below $6,000. There's this affordable segment, and it's significant in size, as you point out. It's the top selling EV, but there's also products in the mid-range, the BYD products in particular. They're all, the significantly high selling models, and they sell 5 of the top 10 selling EVs in China, are below $40,000. They're anywhere from 15,000 to 40,000 US dollars. So if you look at the content you get for that price point, it's very clear that the Chinese EV development has targeted high, high technology at a reasonable price point, whereas the global EV makers really, targeted what I'd call a trickle down approach to commercialization, which is I want to put the EVs alongside my ICEs. The EVs are going to be selling at low volumes, therefore I need to price up and justify that price point with more content. So they practice a trickle down from premium to the mass market, whereas in China, there is no premium for the Chinese brands. They have to target the mass market. And they've done so with affordable technology that's appealing to the younger demographic of consumers in China.
Now, is there any chance that these cars are going to be exported into some of the wealthier countries, like say North America or Europe?
It's high probability for a few reasons. One, you can't find this level of vehicle at this price point from anywhere else in the world at the moment. Why is that? Because Chinese EV companies, not all of them, but some of them, have been able to scale up to a significant enough size and volume to where they have the supply chain advantage for being able to secure the batteries needed at the price points needed to deliver good content for an affordable price. If there's a market for that elsewhere in the world, and I believe there is, not just in the emerging markets, but also in mainstream markets like in particular Europe. US is a little bit more problematic because of the geopolitics between China and the United States. But if you're looking for an affordable electric vehicle, there's only really one place in the world you can find it, and that's China.
What about exports to the emerging economies? And getting back to the comment from the economist that I led off with, whereas, ICE cars would be so cheap that that's what they would continue with. But that seems counterintuitive because a lot of those emerging economies, they could adopt solar, for remote villages or for smaller communities. That would give them access to the electricity to charge their cheap EV.
Well, one of the things that China got right in its development is it didn't put the product first, it put the infrastructure first. The main reason why people hesitate, and being from the US or Europe, that most people view the day-to-day use case and the convenience of not just owning but operating the EV for the uses that they have for it, and it's where China has really put the investment into, and this is because of public and private partnership, put the investments into building out infrastructure needed to power the EV. Looking at the private and public charging infrastructure, China at a point in time a few years ago had more than a third of the private slow charging infrastructure, had more than 50% of the public slow charging infrastructure, and more than 80% of the world's fast charging infrastructure. So when you have that they have two sources of kind of creating and locking in consumers' preferences. One is de-risking the ability to get a vehicle charged, and the second is getting the price point down to affordability. And I think that's really why it's been able to grow at the rate that it has in China. The question is, in the emerging markets, will that set of conditions still be true? Of course, if you want an affordable EV, you need to get it from the place that can produce them, and today that's China. However, I do think there's still the lingering effect of, do people actually believe they can conveniently operate a vehicle as an that we're talking about?
Final question, Bill. We anticipate that there are going to be all sorts of innovations coming up in the EV space, particularly around batteries. What effect might those improvements do to this low-end segment in China?
Well, all of the focus is on how to scale and make EVs more attractive as a value proposition. So any innovations that occur are going to have to compete with the incumbent technology right now in China, that's lithium iron phosphate produced at scale, prioritizing affordability over performance. I mean, that's the reason why LFP dominates. And because there's a segment for that outside of China, I think therefore the Chinese capabilities for electrification will find their way to other markets. If you're the only place you can get a vehicle at an attractive price point, it's flyer, then there will be other markets that will want to have them. The question of new technology coming in to supersede, yes, it will happen. The question, though, is how quickly and how affordable can it be delivered? I mean, we can talk about solid state batteries and forms of propulsion, but they will have the same challenge that EVs have had to this point of, can you produce enough of them to be able to justify the investment, especially if you've sunk a significant investment into trying to get in the game today. So any new technology that comes along will have to prove itself on overall economics. And I think that will be the challenge for commercialization going forward.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.